I think it's time. I think that Shiley said she was visiting with her parents for 2 weeks, so she's not here. The three boys have not come today. Um, the one was at the home choir. I think let's start. It's time. Always the power poured back like sudden rain, or slowly in his breast a presence grew. It clambered back to some remembered height, or soared above the peak from which it fell. This clambering is an interesting word because it means sort of scrambling. The best image I can give you of scrambling is from a beautiful poem called Marpessa by Stephen Phillips. And the children, the little babies, clamber up to the mother to hold on to her. So it's that kind of feeling. So this is happening to Ashwapati. And we saw last week that even though he reached many, many great heights, there were times when he had to fall back. And it is Sri Aurobindo telling us the same experience that he had. I believe I talked to you about the crow. Remember the crow?
Yeah.
Who remembers? No? Okay, I'll tell it again. In the record of yoga, Sri Aurobindo is developing these powers, but he has to develop them so they become stronger and stronger. So he sees a crow outside, and he tells that crow, you fly to this perch. And the crow flies, but he doesn't come to the perch. And Sri Aurobindo understands that he has to build an even stronger force. And when he builds it, he says to the crow, you go here, the crow goes immediately. Yeah. So we see that this is, of course, autobiographical. And Sri Aurobindo is talking about himself. And then he says, each time he rose, there was a larger poise, more power, more wideness, and the next line tells us even a dwelling on a higher spirit plane. And then lastly, the light, capital L, remained in him a longer space. Now I have to find out how to go to the next line. So you may have to help me. I think I'd, yeah. This section got a little messed up.
No, it might be from the beginning.
Yeah.
Continue. It must be continuing.
So you think this is it? What's the next line?
In this oscillation.
Ah, yes.
In?
In this oscillation.
Yeah, I got it. So we're fine now. Yeah. In this oscillation between earth and heaven, in this ineffable communion's climb, there grew in him, as grows a waxing moon, the glory of the integer of his soul. So we must talk about that a little bit. This oscillation, this movement that's like a pendulum, going back and forth, not up and down, but we can understand it, it's that kind of movement between earth and heaven. Now, Sri Aurobindo, of course, tells us there really is no heaven that we can understand the way the West understands it. There is just grades of evolution that go from one to another to another. So it's an ineffable communion's climb. Ineffable is something that's not capable of being expressed. That's ineffable. And he tells us in that, I'd like to read this to you because it's so beautiful. It's from the Life Divine. It is this essential interminability of the Absolute that translates itself into our consciousness through the fundamental negating positives of our spiritual experience, the immobile, immutable self, the Nirguna Brahman, the eternal without qualities, the pure, featureless, one existence, the impersonal, the silence, void of activities, the non-being, the ineffable and the unknowable. So there's much more here, and I've covered it before for many of you, but we have to understand this ineffable being something that he's climbing into, and it is the transcendent, where we find the Ishvara, the Purushottama, the highest of all the stages of the Lord's evolutionary game or play, if we can say. The moment that Satchidananda descends through the supermind, creation occurs. It doesn't occur except through the supermind. And that's when the Purusha and Prakriti begin their divine play. There grew in him, as grows a waxing moon. So the waxing moon is after the new moon and before the full moon. So this is coming into him like a waxing moon. And it's the glory of the integer of his soul. That means the integer here is the entire being, this entity of Ashwapati. So he has a full stop there, and he's going to take us a little further. A union of the real with the unique. Now, I have to read some here about this real, because Sri Aurobindo often uses the word real or real idea, as I mentioned to you before, for the supermind. He also calls the supermind the gnosis. He's a little hesitant to use the supermind and supermental in his works, although they occur infrequently, because of the time in the 40s when Nietzsche was writing, and his supermind was totally different from Sri Aurobindo's. It was the Titan. Remember, we read about the Titan. Huh? The Titan is the personification of the blown-up ego, who crushes everything on his way to the supermind. So we have to remember that the real is, well, let me read it, Life Divine. From our ascending point of view, we may say that the real is behind all that exists. It expresses itself intermediately in an ideal which is a harmonized truth of itself. The ideal throws out a phenomenal reality, a variable conscious being, which, inevitably drawn towards its own essential reality, tries at last to recover it entirely, whether by a violent leap or normally through the ideal which put it forth. So we see that real he uses so many times here, and ideal he uses, and we'll see it much later, and I will define for you Sri Aurobindo's real idea. A gaze of the alone from every face. This is so important. The alone here, because it's capitalized, is the divine. And Ashwapati already sees the divine in every face. Among these billions of people, he sees the divine in each of us. Of course, it's covered up by veils. We're all aware of that. He says in a couple of places, the presence of the eternal in the hours. And the eternal, he tells us in his philosophy, essays in philosophy and yoga, very, very important. That which is cannot perish. It can only lose itself. All is eternal in the eternal spirit. Each is the whole eternal concealed. Now this might seem very far-fetched, but everything is already in us that we need to know and that we have to utilize to progress. So he writes in the Life Divine, the eternal is our refuge. All the rest are false values, the ignorance and its mazes, a self-bewilderment of the soul in phenomenal nature. And we've learned already that when our psychic being descends from its place of rest and enters the human form, there is always this self-bewilderment. Now we're finding out that children are much more aware than we were when we were very young. It's amazing. Their eyes are open. They have lots of hair. It's just extraordinary. And they're conscious immediately, somewhat conscious. Of course, the mind is not yet fully developed, but they are conscious. Widening the mortal mind's half look on things, bridging the gap between man's force and fate, made whole the fragment being we are here. We're all still a fragment being. Until we can enter the second stage of spiritual realization, which begins with a leap from the physical mind to the higher mind. And then, once we are there, we go from the higher to the intuitive mind. We go up to the supermind. So we have, I think, 5 steps. And beyond the supermind, Mother tells us there's still so far to go. There's Satchidananda, and even above Satchidananda, she tells us, because she has been to all of these places. She has been to all of these worlds. She has created all these galaxies. We don't realize the power of Mother. And I'll tell you a little story. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of Anandamayi Ma. 1, 2, 3. Yes? Most of you have heard. Very good. Anandamayi Ma decided to come and see Mother. And she went upstairs and knelt before Mother, and Mother handed her a flower. And she gave it back to Mother. And Mother handed the flower again to her, and she gave it back to Mother. The third time, Mother gave her that flower, and she bowed down before Mother. The power in that flower must have been so incredible that she recognized Mother as the divine. It's a very interesting story, you see. Well, I'll tell you another story because this is very important. My friend, who was a doctor who took care of Sri Aurobindo, became ill, and he got this, what do you call it, in the head when...
Tumor?
No, not a tumor.
Aneurysm?
No, it's when you're...
Dizzy.
Huh?
Vertigo.
Vertigo?
No. Anybody? Huh?
You felt dizzy?
It's a dizziness, yeah, but there's a term for it. And at that time, he decided he was going to come to America. And I met him in New York. Mother told him, don't do anything. But he couldn't handle it. And so he went to a surgeon. And in those days, they drilled through the center of the skull to cure it. And it didn't help. He came back to India and began to visit all the great yogis, asking them, can you cure me? The last one, and I'm making this a point, the last one was Satya Sai Baba. And he bowed before Sai Baba and he said, can you cure me? And Sai Baba simply said to him, why do you come to a 40-watt bulb when you have the sun? Oh. His name was Dr. Sanyal. So we see this power, this widening the mortal mind's half look on things. Our half look on things is because we live in the duality. We cannot see the unity in everything, which already exists, but we're not there yet. Bridging the gap between man's force and fate, made whole the fragment being we are here. So again, the fragment being, mind's half look. But now something happens to Ashwapati. At last was won a firm spiritual poise, a constant lodging in the eternal's calm, in the eternal's realm, a safety in the silence and the ray, a settlement in the immutable. The immutable is something that is not susceptible to change, cannot change. Now, I want to read just a line from Sri Aurobindo to a disciple, because it seems to be very apt now, and this was written 100 years ago. Even if there is much darkness, and this world is full of it, and the physical nature of man also, Yet a ray of the true light can prevail eventually against a tenfold darkness. Believe that and cleave to it always. Oh, that is so helpful to all of us. His heights of being lived in the still self. His mind could rest on a supernal ground. Now, supernal for us, or for Sri Aurobindo generally, means a kind of heavenly ground. You could almost say it's a synonym of heavenly. And look down on the magic and the play. Well, this whole world is magic. He tells us that. And yet he says there's no magic. So he's looking down on this seeming magic and the play. And what is it? Where the God-child lies on the lap of night and dawn. Now that's two anapaests in this line. Where the God-child, one anapaest, on the lap of, second one. Where the God-child lies on the lap of night and dawn. Now, when I talked to Alok, he said the God-child is the psychic being. The night and dawn are the bright and dark phases through which the soul must pass for its growth. And that's a good lesson for us. We all have to pass through these stages. Now, Parani told me something else, and I'd like to share that with you. He says the growth of the divine potentialities in man is spoken of in Veda as the growth of a child. The master takes the symbol and employs it thus, where the God-child lies on the lap of night and dawn. The idea is that through the state of ignorance and through the state of awakening that is dawn, through the alterations of two, the God-child in man attains its growth. Ignorance is not thus something anti-divine. It contributes to the growth of the divine in man. This certainly reminds one of the hymn in the Veda, which runs as follows. Two are joined together, powers of truth, powers of Maya. They have built the child and given him birth, and they nourish his growth. Lastly, there's one by Madhav, and it's quite good. It's in his satsang. He writes, now here is a reference to the Vedic imagery where the Rishi speaks of the child being suckled by two mothers. He refers to two mothers, one dark and the other rosy, night and dawn, or day, signifying movement of obscurity and movement of light. This divine soul that is given to the divine, is nursed by both the mothers. He needs the succor of night and the nourishment of the day. To rest for a while, he needs to be in the lap of Mother Night. To be active, he is in the lap of Mother Dawn. And that has always meant a lot to me, because we should not dismiss the darkness. We all have to go through it, and we can see that in this darkness there is also light, because there is always light, because there is God. And I'll come to that one day. And the everlasting puts on time's disguise. The everlasting, of course, is God. the eternal. He is the everlasting. And note that Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the E. Now, I haven't gotten very far today, but it's already time. So,
This line is,
hmm,
this last line is completely contrary, but Sri Aurobindo uses it so beautifully that everlasting puts on time's distance.
yes, because the everlasting has decided now to leave the timeless, where there is no distinction of time, and come into this, we can say, this sorry world, or whatever we want to call it at the moment, and it puts on a disguise, and we have to find it. We have to look through ourselves, look through the world. You know, I'm told, at least by Ranganathan, that at the supramental level, everything that is happening in the world is perfect. It is we at the level of ignorance that see all this hatred, violence, etc. Would you read for us? Thank you.
Always the power poured back like sudden rain, or slowly in his breast a presence grew. It clambered back to some remembered height, or soared above the peak from which it fell. Each time he rose, there was a larger voice, a dwelling on a higher spirit plane. The light remained in him a longer space. In this oscillation between earth and heaven, in this ineffable communion's climb, there grew in him, as grows a waxing moon, the glory of the integer of his soul. A union of the real with the unique, a gaze of the alone from every face, the presence of the eternal in the hours, widening the mortal mind's half look on things, bridging the gap between man's force and fate, made whole the fragment being yet here. At last was one, a firm spiritual voice, a constant lodging in the eternal's realm, a safety in the silence and the rain, a settlement in the immutable. His heights of being lived in the still self. His mind would rest on a supernal ground and look down on the magic and the play, where the God-child lies on the lap of night and dawn, and the everlasting puts on time's disguise.
Thank you. We'll have a few moments of silence and end with Om. Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
This night and dawn, is it like the gunas? Like because you say lots of times the ignorance, it is like the tamasic qualities, or it is the spectrum of tamasic and sattvic?
No, I wouldn't say so much because neither one of them is tamasic. It may seem to be, but the divine dwells in each part, from the inconscient, the subconscious, the superconscious, all of these aspects. So this idea of the night and dawn is what we first found in Book 1, Canto 1. And if you'll read that again, because it's the one canto that Sri Aurobindo revised 50 times in his life. 50 times. I mean, he worked on other aspects of Book 1, Canto 1 also, or Book 1 up to Canto 5. But this one canto, this first one, 50 times. And he said he didn't write it for poetry. He writes that very clearly to Amal. He didn't care whether his poetry was ever published or not. What he said was how much could he ascend in his consciousness using poetry as a way, and each time he ascended higher and higher, he rewrote the lines. Amazing. So, and of course, Mother tells us this is his message. All the rest are just preparations. Okay. Thank you. Good to see you.